all over. Scrub, scrub, scrub.
So you don't have to use your skippo. 4.
They hang their towels on the wall and find pajamas, big and small. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to do a recent and current reads video. So it's February 13th, and I have read 3 books since the last time I checked in, one of which I can't really talk about because it was a BookTube prize book, and you'll be hearing about that later when I can talk about it. And then since then I've completed 2 audiobooks. The first one is The Neverending Story by Ende, and that's translated by Roswitha Quadflag probably. Sorry, I didn't pronounce that very well. Anyhow, I had really loved the movie The Neverending Story when I was a kid. I watched it multiple times, and so when I was thinking about books that I could read for Read German Books 2020, the year-long reading theme sponsored by Mel at Mel's Bookland Adventures and Britta Bowler at the Second Shelf, I thought that would be a perfect book to listen to on audio. It's a children's fantasy book. I had been talking with Mel about it last year as a, something I should pick up and read because of my love for the movie. And so I did. And it made me realize that I have very specific, vivid memories of like 3 or 4 scenes from the movie The Neverending Story, and then there's this whole swath of an entire book that I didn't remember at all. So that was interesting to realize how little I actually did remember from my childhood viewing of The Neverending Story. Secondly, I would say this is a slower paced children's fantasy novel. This is definitely of its time. It was written in the 1980s, and it definitely isn't written in the style of children's fantasy today. That being said, I did enjoy it. I did find parts of it slow. By the end, I think I had the speed up to like 1.8 speed on the audiobook, but I think that had more to do with the narrator and less to do with the content of the story. So what is the story? So The Neverending Story, if you've never heard about it before, is about a little boy named Bastian, and he goes to a bookshop. He's trying to run away from bullies at school, and he steals this old book from this bookshop, and he then goes up into the attic at his elementary school and starts to read this book. And as he's reading this book, which is about a fantasy world, and he's a fantasy world that is experiencing some effects that they don't really know why it's happening. And a young boy in this fantasy world gets sent on an adventure to try to rescue his world. And Bastian becomes a part of the story, basically. So the first half of the story is Bastian reading this book and reading about the adventures of this young boy in this fantasy world. And then the second half of the book is Bastian in the fantasy world living his own adventure. And it's very morality-based, as fantasy novels are wont to be. But there's a lot of adventures, and it's very whimsical. And so I would say it's quite enjoyable, and I don't know that I liked it as well as I liked the movie when I was a kid, but then again, I don't remember that much about the movie. So it was a fun experience on audiobook. And obviously I read that for Read German Books 2020. I then finished another audiobook, and this one is a nonfiction essay collection called My Time Among the Whites by Jennine, Capo, Crucet. And I loved this book. It's about 4 hours on audiobook. I would highly recommend you pick it up on audio because the narrator is the author herself, and she is fabulous. And so this essay collection is all about Jennine's experiences growing up as a Cuban American. She was born in this country. Her parents are both immigrants from Cuba. She grew up in Miami. She then goes to college up in New York at oh my gosh, I've totally blanked on the name of the big the big Ivy League school in New York, in upstate New York, whatever, it doesn't matter. Definitely a white school, and she realizes for the first time that she's not white. And this book kind of explores her experiences in the United States over the last 20 years or so, as a non-white person who sometimes passes as white. I found it fascinating. I think she has a lot to say about American culture and about racism in this country, especially in the Trump era. She has an essay in there all about Disney World and the inherent racism and white supremacy that is set up in Disney World that I just found fascinating. I love Disney World. I've been 3 times and I'm a big fan, but yeah, she's not wrong. There's a great essay about picking your wedding DJ and what that looks like when it's an interracial relationship, and one side of the family is Cuban American and one side of the family is white American. That was really, really fascinating. And just, I think probably though the essay that really struck home for me the most was Jennine becomes, after college and all of her education, she becomes a professor herself. And after she's published some novels, she gets asked to speak at a different university from the one that she works at. And in the course of speaking to this group of first-year students at this university, which is majority white student body, she asks the people at that speech to consider how many professors they've had over the course of their schooling who look like them, who come from the same background as they do. And all of the white students don't understand the question. They can't even comprehend why she would be asking such a question. But when she finally gets them to think about it, most of them are like, yeah, all of them, or mostly all of them. Whereas the handful of students of color that are in the room immediately know what she's getting at and can immediately identify that they've had 1, maybe 2 professors of color in their schooling, in the entirety of their school careers. And as she's discussing that discrepancy, she says, I can see the light bulbs going on in some of the white students. And in fact, a young man gets up and asks the question during the Q&A period of, he's a white student, what can he do to change this and to make the number of professors at his university more representative of the students that attend that university. And she's discussing that, and then a young woman who's sitting in the front row who's become more and more agitated, more and more visibly agitated as the speech and the question and answer period continues. She's jiggling her leg and just clearly distressed about the conversation. And her response of basically that the speaker, Jennine, is the racist one. She's going to try to make the number of professors and the racial makeup of the professors of the school match the actual student body. And in order to do this, she had told the white male student that had asked the question, well, say you, in the next 5 years, your school has to hire 3 professors. In order to make at least 2/3 of those professors should be professors of color, if not all 3 of them, in order to try to get some kind of balance back into the makeup of the teachers in the school. And this young white woman just basically loses her shit and calls the speaker racist for basically reverse racism, right, against whites. And the discussion that Jennine tries to have with this young woman about how systemic inequality has led to this condition of not having professors of color in all of these colleges across America was such a light bulb moment for me. I mean, I consider myself fairly woke, and I read a lot about social justice, but I had never thought back over my own college education and realized how few professors I had that were people of color and why that was and what should be done about it. And it just was such a light bulb moment for me, as I said. So for that essay alone, I would ask you to please consider picking up My Time Among the Whites by Jennine Capo Crucet. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. 5-star read for me. Earlier today, I was watching a video from Soggy Expat, I believe is the name of her channel. I'll link her down below. She's a great booktuber, American living in Wales with her husband, and she does these lunchtime chats where she just talks about the books that she's reading, and she basically was talking about how she's reading 80,000 books and completing none of them, and hashtag relatable, because I am reading 6 or 7 books and not completing any of them. So I'm reading on ebook Gentleman Jack by Angela Steidele, translated by Katie Derbyshire. This is another book written in German, translated from the German, a nonfiction about a woman in Lister in the 1800s who was a lesbian and who kept highly detailed journals her whole life about her lesbian relationships, and this book is all about her sort of living as outside traditional society and her lesbian relationships. It's just fascinating. I'm reading The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This is a buddy read with Alicia. This is a book about it takes place right before the Civil War in the South, and it's all about Henry Townsend, a former slave who becomes a slave owner himself. Amazing. I am reading The Yellow House. This is a buddy read with Patrice and Karen over at Run Right Reads. This is a nonfiction all about the author's family owning a home in New Orleans over like 3 generations. And this home is in what's called the East or New Orleans, an area that experiences a lot of flooding and was created whole cloth out of the wetlands in the early part of the 20th century as a sort of we can build anything anywhere period of American history. This is fascinating as well. I am reading Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. This is a buddy read with a whole bunch of folks and is also a group read-along being hosted by Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. This is historical fiction about Thomas Cromwell during the reign of Henry VIII. This is the second book in the series. I've read the first 2 chapters. Loving this. I am reading The Last Thing You Surrender by Leonard Pitts Jr. This is a World War II historical fiction following several characters and the racial inequality that was inherent in black folks fighting World War II and black folks participating in the civilian support system that was built up in the U.S. during that time period, and all of the social injustice that happened around that. It's amazing. This is the Read So Lit group read sponsored by Dee Dee over at Brown Girl Reading. I am reading If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. I'm listening to this on audiobook, and this is a buddy read with Lindsay's Book Life, and this is my 3rd James Baldwin, and this book, I'm about 40% of the way in, and it is absolutely stunning. The language is stunning. The story is stunning. This is the story of a young woman, 19-year-old, who is living, I'm not sure, I believe in New York City, and with her family, her mother and father and sister, and her fiance has been arrested and put in jail for a crime that he did not commit. And so we're following her as she tries to navigate her job and her family life and dealing with trying to help her fiance legally to get him out of jail. It's amazing. And then the last one that I've kind of put on hold because I'm reading all these other books is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is my classics read from my classics project, and I thought that Uncle Tom's Cabin would be an appropriate read for Black History Month, but I'm just reading so many other things. I had to put something aside, and that one's waited a couple hundred years. It can wait a little while longer. So yeah, reading a lot of stuff right now, and really enjoying all of it, but it's just because I'm reading so many things, I'm not getting anything finished very quickly. So that's what I've read recently and what I am currently reading. I hope that you are all finding a lot of great books to read, and I will talk to you later.